Hello and welcome, Inspired Podcast community. This is your new episode. My name is Caroline, and my today's guest is Grace Quantock, and I'm so happy that you are here and said yes to our interview. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm really excited today. I'm so glad to be here. I'm actually pretty excited today because actually the book is in a newspaper. It's in a national newspaper. And what's really exciting is in the online version, they included pictures of me with my rescue dog, one of my rescue dogs. So
Oh, I love
I'm
that. And I see your book in the background, the cover. And I also can tell you that I added it to the Amazon list I created for all my podcast guests. So it's already there. And I'm so excited about talking about that. Of course, I would like to introduce you to the audience first. And
of
you
course.
are an award-winning anti-oppressive psychotherapeutic counselor, speaker, and author based in South Wales. With over 15 years of experience, you support marginalized individuals living with chronic pain, illness, and complex trauma. Recognized for her groundbreaking work, Grace is a future Young Leader of Wales Award recipient and has been featured in major publications like The Guardian and The Times of London. As an outspoken critic of the bootstrap wellness narrative, she advocates for systemic change in healthcare and has recently published her book, and you talked about it, Living Well with Chronic Illness. Grace's unique perspective is shaped by her own experience with chronic illness, fueling her mission to help others thrive on their own terms. Welcome to the Inspired Podcast, Grace Quantock.
Thank you.
So happy to meet you. Okay, my first question to you. How has your personal experience with chronic illness shaped your approach to counseling and advocacy?
Yes. So, really a lot of what has shaped that is, when I was doing clinical training, they actually had, I mean, I'm, really hoping it's better now because there has been, I trained kind of, a little while ago, but they did lesson, a series on working with difference. And that was where they talked about things like illness or disability or LGBTIQ plus things. And so, I came up to those lessons and I said, oh, great. Are you going to teach me to work with non-disabled men? Because that's who's other from me because I'm a disabled woman. So I kind of said is that what I'm going to learn? And they were kind of like, no, we're going to teach people how to work with disabled people and LGBT people and people of color. I'm like, hold on, so hold on. You're making this the default, and you're actually calling us other. What would have been really interesting would have been to check in around how we work with that which we perceive as other from us, or that which is unfamiliar from us. So, as I was kind of going through the training, I knew there were a lot of spaces where things needed to be, I guess, a lot more nuanced. Quite often I feel like therapy has been, really, really helpful for me as a disabled woman with chronic illness. And of course, I am a therapist, so I work with clients, and I actually specialize in complexity. So I work with complex trauma, people who've got multiple marginalized identities. But where I struggled is often therapy. Psychodynamic therapy, one of my trainings, traditionally approaches chronic illness very much in isolation. So it orients the issues in our body. So it says like, oh, are you're struggling because you're suffering or because you're in pain. Now that might well be part of it, but it's not as simple as that. It's not only our history and our childhood and our experiences. I love what there's a Jungian analyst, James Hillman, and he said, sometimes therapy can make every problem a subjective inner problem. But that's not where problems come from. They come from the environment, the cities, the economy, the racism, the architecture, the school systems, capitalism, exploitation. So if you turn all that on you and only look as though you are the one who's wrong, it can be very isolating. Whereas actually loads of people with chronic illness struggle with lack of accessible environments, with the fact that a lot of research isn't where we need it to be, and we perhaps don't have the treatments or the kind of symptom management that we need. And you're not alone in that. So in my work, what chronic illness has helped me to learn as therapist is to really look at the systemic and the community, as well as your individual experience. So how did your parents treat illness when you were a child? How did you see illness and pain growing up? That's important, but it's one factor in the wider community and systemic experience that impacts us.
Wow, I understand. It's your systemic approach, of course. And it's not only it is easy to say, yeah, you have an illness or something, a disorder, and then this is your excuse, not only for the people, but also for the psychotherapists, for example, for the helpers. And this is like labeling, and then you don't see really the solution, right?
And sometimes there's an informal term called a rubbish bin diagnosis, and so some diagnoses are stigmatized like this, and so some professionals, because of the lack of support in their training, because of the ableism that still exists in healthcare and professional trainings, unfortunately, because of the one that has existed in the past, even if it hopefully is changing now, it has still trained people that are in practice today. And so what sometimes happens is people will look at a newly presenting symptom and they will go, oh, it's just one of your pre-existing conditions. And I talk about this actually in the book, where I presented with a new symptom that turned out to be a very serious neurological event. But at the beginning, the neurologist went, oh, it's probably just one of your it's this pre-existing condition. And I went, well, like, that condition does have a lot of symptoms, so you could kind of ascribe a lot of things to it probably, but this actually wasn't one of them. And so I really was able, I was able actually to challenge him and say, well, that's the first time that this illness has ever presented with this symptom. Like, do we think that it's changing the disease, which of course isn't true. And I was able to kind of then get an MRI and get some treatment. But sometimes people will look, and the other thing that can also happen is when you experience the intersection of ableism and ageism. So it's when somebody will kind of go, well, you're doing really well for a wheelchair user, or you're doing really well for a chronically ill person, or for somebody of your age. And that doesn't take into account, so what if, like, you were at a certain level, your symptoms or experience or capacity or mobility was a certain level, and now it's drastically changed? If the medic's expectation, if the helper's expectation it is that, well, you're not going to have a good quality of life, then they possibly won't investigate fully. I had a psychiatrist once who said, look at me, look at you, of course you're depressed. I said, excuse me? And she said, look at you, you're 28, you have to be pushed around in a wheelchair by your boyfriend. Who'd want your life? And I was like, okay, you've just, it was actually my husband, but anyway, you've actually just shown me really clearly that you're not a safe person for me, and you don't have the expertise or the knowledge to treat me.
So she was kind of overwhelmed, or not overwhelmed is not the right word. Like she was not the right person, and she was incapable or incompetent as well.
Well, I mean, I think you're right. I think she's probably very overloaded. I don't want to criticize her personally. I mean, I have absolute understanding of how difficult the mental health system is. She did also actually take, she asked what I was doing to support myself, and I told her the books I was reading, and bless her, she wrote them down to share with her other patients. She obviously did want to make a difference, but she was holding, she had been she had absorbed somewhere along the line these very ableist views, the idea that life with disability isn't worth living, the idea that it would be impossible to be happy living a life like mine. And none of that's true, but it's certainly how we often see chronic illness and disability portrayed in media. So of course we will absorb these views. But as helpers, part of our professional role is noticing when we have absorbed these prejudicial views and working to overcome them and dismiss them and not let them impact patients.
Yes, I understand. So that means it all starts with you. So the person who wants to help others have to investigate first the prejudices and the limitations, let's say. And if so, just question, is it true? And then and then be a little bit tolerant. But I also think the word is not the right word. we talk about professional persons here, and we never know, maybe she had a bad day, but she also, what I understood is she had good intentions to help.
And it's tricky, isn't it? Because she may have had a bad day, but yet she could have really harmed a patient. She may have had good intentions, and yet her behavior was still harmful. So it's really tricky. I think one thing I always encourage people to do, all of us, including professionals, is to really ask ourselves, where am I orienting the issue? So where am I locating the problem? When I'm speaking to somebody about something they're struggling with, am I locating it in them and their body? Or am I locating it somewhere else, like in the what? So for example, sometimes people will talk about healthiness, long-term, and weight. Now, a lot of this includes a huge amount of anti-fat bias, which is a great problem. But what people will often talk about, I notice, is they will orient the issue in the individuals. So they will treat people not being able to access the right cultural food for them, the right food for their conditions, whatever it might, enough food, affordable food. They somehow treat it as an individual problem, and as though if people just kind of made more of an effort in the kitchen, quote unquote, that somehow everything would be better. And I remember being in a meeting once and they were talking about what they called quote unquote junk food, which again I think is a very stigmatizing term. And I put my hand up and this is quite a few years ago now, and I said, I love that you think I am that powerful, that the multi-million-dollar marketing budget of some of these companies is no match for my willpower. And that I can just overcome the fact that my kitchen is not adapted, is not accessible. The place I live, they couldn't do it. So I love that you think that I can just transcend all these difficulties, that the fact that food companies hire psychologists and have huge marketing budgets, huge campaigns for things, but you think the solution to the fact that they're closing down leisure centres because they can't afford to keep them open, so there's no safe place to exercise, for example, or many people experience street harassment as we're disabled. You think the solution to all of these systemic issues is just for me to try harder. I love that you think I'm that powerful, but I hate to break it to you, I'm actually only human. So I'm actually not powerful enough to override multiple systemic difficulties. And so I just always ask, where are we locating it? And if you are locating it in the individual, who is that convenient for? Does that let anybody off the hook? Does it kind of go, oh, well, we don't need to make the park accessible for disabled children because they just should not be disabled or something? What happens when we locate it in the individual?
I understand. It's like putting yourself over others, like something from
Yes.
a society or a company as well, and they might have the perspective to serving people with their, let's say, junk food, but it isn't healthy at all. And then everyone is wondering why we are overweighted or not healthy anymore, and we have to take all those pills. Thank you so much for sharing. I think I understood your approach to that. Okay, of course, I have another question.
Okay.
What motivated you to challenge the bootstrap wellness narrative, and what changes would you like to see in the healthcare system?
Oh, such a good question. So, for me, I guess with the bootstrap wellness narrative, really, for myself personally and for my clients, I struggled with seeing um, books, media out there that were very prescriptive and very aspirational in certain ways, right? So they were aspirational towards, they always focused on an aesthetic that was thin, that had anti-fat bias in it, that promoted a certain type of of healthiness, a kind of an aesthetic of health. Because actually, you mentioned diet. What's healthy for me might be very different to somebody who has a baby and is nursing that baby, might be very different to somebody who is working on an oil rig, or somebody who's doing manual labor all day. It might be very different to an indigenous person living in Turtle Island on their nation land. It's going to be all very different. It's going to have different cultural backgrounds. It's going to have different access to foods. It's all going to be different in different ways. And so, But I didn't see any of that. What I saw was things that were very aspirational towards a certain one-size-fits-all narrative. And I felt like it ignored my lived experience and the lived experience of the kind of people I work with. And so, I thought about what I call, the bootstrap wellness narrative. And I also talk about compulsive miracle cure culture. And, I've come up with these terms of the bootstrap wellness narrative to really just name what I see happening. So the bootstrap wellness narrative is an approach to healing that is individualistic, perfectionist, and it tells us that we can and we should heal alone, and that if we try hard enough, we can have a quote unquote normal life. But in that, it assumes we all have the same access to the same resources, like wealth, fresh food, transport, safe housing, green space, community. It assumes that everybody has access to these things in the same ways, which we don't. And then it ignores or makes invisible systemic inequalities. And it tells you, you can do it. You have all the power. You can change your life, which sounds empowering, right? To say, you can do it. I did it. You can do it if you try hard enough. Just follow my plan. But here's the thing. If you don't have access to the same resources, if you don't have the same conditions or the same body or the same experiences as that person, their plan may well not work for you. And so then actually what seemed very empowering at the beginning is actually hugely disempowering, because it tells you, you have all the power, you can do it if you try. And so maybe, like me, you try. And then it doesn't work. And you start thinking, what did I do wrong? I tried. What did I do wrong? I did exactly what they did. I tried to do exactly. I did everything I could. Why didn't it work for me? What's wrong with my body? And so I think when we tell people they have all the power when that isn't true, that's actually very disempowering over time. It feels empowering at the beginning. But what in this work, in the book, we talk about is discerning, is separating out the bits that we do have control over and what we can impact, and the bits that we don't have control over, and how we're going to navigate living without that control. It's more nuanced work. It's trickier. It's not as kind of rah-rah go-go as saying, you can do it, you can be like me if you just try and buy my course, 99 easy payments of $99 or whatever it might be. Like, it's fine. I sell courses, people can sell courses, but it's that promise of like, you can do it just like me. Well, I don't know. And I specifically do not say in the book the medications I take, the diagnoses I have, or specifically what I do in my healing, because it may not be relevant to anybody else.
I understand. And it refers back to what you said earlier about ask yourself where it is located or where you locate the problem. And you talked about the individual versus the resources that we don't have access to in the same way or the same manner, you said. And yeah, I love that because I understand something, something here, and I learned something. Thank you so much about, so yes, I'm so happy about that you published the book, that it's out already. You can check it out, of course. We have to mention it again. And I think also people can reach out to you, of course, and get in contact, of course. And I have another question for you. Can you share some strategies from your book, Living Well with Chronic Illness, that have been particularly impactful for your readers?
Yes, absolutely. So, we get some wonderful feedback. And yeah, one thing we do in the book is we do take you through in the book creating your own journal. So we teach you how to do a journaling practice, how to use a journal. And the journal can be really useful. It's not necessarily an aesthetic journal. It doesn't necessarily have the kind of journal spreads that you would necessarily want to put on Instagram, but it's around having something where we put down, we kind of give a resting place, as Dr. Chris Pinkola-Aristides, one of my teachers calls it, to the things that we struggle with. So I love the journaling taking through. And I guess one of the other ones that I really appreciate, because we have exercises all throughout the book, and somebody asked me what my favorite exercise is, and I do love the plates exercise. It's actually the last one in the book. I really, really like the plates. I put that exercise in almost every chapter. I wanted to have it everywhere. When I have a favorite thing, I write it, like, I put it everywhere. And then my editor, who's very talented, says, Grace, you can't mention it in every chapter. And I'm going, yeah, okay, I know. So I love the plates exercise, where we talk about how we attune to what we're holding and how much capacity we have, because often when we're trying to do a new thing, we want to be well enough to do it, we want to have the capacity to do it, but we don't necessarily know, because for many of us we struggle to be very much in touch with our bodies or embodied in our bodies, because our bodies are perhaps where there's a lot of chronic pain. Or perhaps if you think maybe somebody has a car accident and maybe afterwards they're scared to drive past the accident site. Right, that's where the accident happened. The bad thing happened. But what if your body is where the bad things happened? How do you stay in touch and in relationship and present at the site of so much pain and trauma? So many people will check out or clinically dissociate to a greater or lesser extent. And we don't say not to do this, it's a survival mechanism. But what we talk about is how we can then still not overload ourselves. So what sometimes happens is you're checked out, you don't really know kind of how you're doing, but you're used to that. You just kind of carry on, and then maybe you have to do something big like another medical procedure or something you're excited, even something you're happy about, but you aren't really able to assess how many spoons, as we sometimes say, you have, or how full your energetic battery is, or how calm you are, how close it would take you to becoming overwhelmed or overloaded or starting to cry, and none of that's wrong to do, but if you've got, say, a doctor's appointment that you've waited 18 months for, you don't want to spend it crying and unable to articulate what you want to say because you've waited 18 months and you need to actually use this appointment. So we use the plates exercise to navigate, to find out how and where we are, and then we can pull in the tools we need to be able to actually support ourselves, to be able to do that doctor's appointment. And again, we have a whole chapter, and actually I think some people's favorite chapter at the moment is how to talk to your medics, how to prep for the appointment, how to navigate conversations with medical professionals. I interview medical professionals in it, one of whom is chronically ill, who gives their tips. So yeah, I think the plates exercise, I use it all the time, the plates exercise.
Oh, wow, thank you so much for sharing. And again, I learned so much. First of all, you compared, or you named it resting place, your journal, and I never heard this before, but I can understand, because this is where you lay down your concerns at rest, right? And it's so beautiful. You say, oh yeah, I can deal with you later, for example.
Yes,
this is something
yes.
I came across. You don't want to deal with your problems, then you can write it down and deal with them later. Then you mentioned the accident, where you had not you, but when people have an accident and then they are afraid of driving past that place. And I thought about a feeling when you have you talked about the body. What is when the location is the body, and what are you doing with it? So when I think about, you had a trauma and a bad feeling, and this is also in your body, and you are afraid. I have to laugh because of this, because I understood something, and I'm so grateful for that. So you have a bad feeling and you avoid feeling it, right? And this is also an exercise to not be afraid. This is what I understood. And also it is so important to learn how to talk with your doctors or medical helpers, because of all the words you don't understand, maybe, or also how you behave, what are you afraid of asking questions because you are afraid of the answer, for example. I think that this is all in your book. I have a clue it might be in your book, and I'm so happy for that. Okay, I have another question for you. And I think it's our last one. How do you balance your professional commitments with self-care? And what advice would you give to others in similar roles?
Okay, lovely. Great question. So yeah, for me, we do actually talk about this in the book. So what one of my teachers, Kelly Deals, who we do also reference, talks about how we build little machines, little kind of systems in our lives, so that we don't end up feeling overworked like machines. So I do a lot of batch working. So, for example, if I was filming content for social media, I would get set up, I would do the lighting setup, and I would film several at once. Then I would kind of have another session where I would schedule a couple of weeks in advance. So I tend to batch things a lot, because often for me, the energy is in getting set up and getting into the mode to do the one thing. If I then do it and rest, do it and rest, do it and rest, that's much easier than what we call task switching, which is often difficult for many neurodivergent people, and I'm also neurodivergent. So it's when you kind of switch from doing this one thing to then doing another thing to then doing another thing. That can often take a lot more executive capacity. So for me, if I batch my work, that saves on a lot of energy. I do also have, we talk in the book about creating your own bespoke, personalized healing roadmap. So I, of course, have my own healing roadmap. And I, work on that and kind of take care of myself, my self-care through that. I do a lot of things in advance because I'm disabled and I'm a therapist and a writer. And I care for my partner who's also disabled. And we have 3 rescue dogs. And so, I talk about how we set up in the book systems and routines that we say, you let the systems hold stuff so that you don't have to.
Yes.
I feel like there's another part of the question. What was did I miss a bit?
Yes, it was totally, and I thank you so much. And what I realized when we mailed before our interview was that you implemented some, I think, bots, or I don't know how you call this. It was an automatic email responder, and it was well explained. So I never saw this before in that way. It is very nice to receive emails from you in preparation as well, or to confirm. It's a different way. So thank you so much. And this leads me also to say, when you want to reach out to Grace, please reach out. She's amazing, of course. And then you receive those beautiful emails as well. So now it's time for your last thoughts to the audience, please.
Thank you. So, really, I guess what I'm wanting to kind of say as we close is that if you're struggling in healthcare, if you're struggling with your chronic illness, if you're struggling in wellness or trying to do the latest diet or exercise regime or fashionable thing, what if you haven't failed? What if you're struggling, but it's okay that we need to make wellness and healthcare work for you? You're not alone in this. You're not wrong if you find cookie cutter plans haven't worked for you. I believe we are more unique, messy, struggling, fantastic, brilliant, human than many of the media has made us out to be. And we need to work with ways of being and ways of taking care of ourselves that welcome and embrace that reality. And because of that, I believe in us and I believe in our possibilities.
Wow, I totally agree. I thank you so much for our interview. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
I see you in the next episode.